weeks, and we intentionally made it an hour each and not an hour and a half or 2 hours, just so that it feels easeful and it's not like this serious thing that takes a long time on Saturday mornings. And so as we go through it, feel free to, like take with you what's helpful. And if there are things that we do and talk about that aren't helpful, just leave them on the table. Each class will have some meditation practice, which will be guided by me. And I'll give a little bit of a talk, mainly on mindfulness, and we'll talk about the 4 foundations of mindfulness and how they relate to how we relate to the earth. And then we'll have some time for group discussion, Q&A, sharing, whatever comes up, and that part will not be recorded. So before we jump into introductions, kind of bringing ourselves into the room and maybe sharing a little bit about ourselves, whatever we feel comfortable with, I'd like to share some kind of norms or multicultural agreements, just so that we can kind of guide how we interact with each other here. These are completely suggestions. The first thing is I would really invite you for this hour every time we meet, just to give yourself permission to really be here. So it's a little hard on Zoom to maybe avoid the temptation of multitasking, or maybe like an iMessage pops up or whatever it might be. So sometimes it takes like actually active effort and discipline to be like, I'm going to really allow myself to be here in this class right now. So it's a gift, right? It's a gift of not multitasking, of not trying to, on the side, get something done at the same time. And it's also a gift to each other, to be here for each other and to really actively listen with open ears and open hearts. So I'm going to read some agreements for multicultural interactions, which were adapted by East Bay Meditation Center from an original set of agreements by Visions, Inc., which is a consultancy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so this can be your first step of allowing yourself to completely be here in the form of just listening to my voice. If you feel like you can close your eyes, whatever is comfortable for you, but this can be kind of our foray into just being here and tapping into our auditory sense and listening to these words. So the first one is try it on. Be willing to try on new ideas or ways of doing things that might not be what you prefer or are familiar with. The second one is practice self-focus. Attend to or speak about your own experiences and responses. Do not speak for a whole group or express assumptions about the experience of others. Understand the difference between intent and impact. Try to understand and acknowledge impact. Denying the impact of something said by focusing on intent is often more destructive than the initial interaction. Practice both and. When speaking, substitute and for but. This practice acknowledges and honors multiple realities. Refrain from blaming or shaming self and others. Practice giving skillful feedback. Move up, move back. Encourage full participation by all present. Take note of who is speaking and who is not. If you tend to speak often, consider moving back and vice versa. Practice mindful listening. Try to avoid planning what you'll say as you listen to others. Be willing to be surprised, to learn something new. Listen with your whole self. Confidentiality. Take home learnings, but don't identify anyone other than yourself now or later. If you want to follow up with anyone regarding something they said in this session, ask first and respect their wishes. Right to pass. You can say, I pass, if you don't wish to speak. So those are the agreements. I love those for not just these types of gatherings, but any sort of gathering or meeting. I love keeping those in mind. So I'll start with an introduction of myself and a little bit of background, probably a little bit more than usual. And then I'll pass the talking stick over to whoever would like to go next, or invite somebody else to go next. And so we can say our names, where we're joining from. If you feel like sharing any part of your identity that is kind of alive for you right now that you'd like to share. And maybe what drew you to this course, why you're here. So my name is Jennifer Wong. As I said, I go by she, her, identify as Taiwanese American, joining from Nashville, specifically Cherokee land in East Nashville. I have a practice of meditation and mindfulness that has spanned a couple of different traditions. So I started out in the Shambhala tradition, which is based on Tibetan Buddhism, over 15 years ago. And I became a facilitator with them. And at the same time, I've also practiced with Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition, which is called the Plum Village tradition. Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese Zen master who actually recently passed away just last month. And I also practice a lot, and this is my main tradition right now, with the Insight tradition, which came from the Theravadan tradition. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So I've been teaching for a while, and in Nashville, I co-founded and lead the People of Color Sangha. And I also teach for One Dharma Nashville, which is an insight-oriented meditation group. I teach like a beginner's class for them. And I am here because the more I've been practicing and the more I've been caring about and learning about what's going on with our planet and what we're doing to it, the more I really see the linkages between how we're often like disassociated with the land. And I feel that in myself. I've been living in big cities all of my life. And so I feel living in the big cities, how I am disconnected with Earth. And I read about and watch documentaries on people who are more connected to the Earth. And I was like, yeah, that feels more natural to me. And I feel more of a natural inclination to care for the Earth, feeling that connection. So I wanted to kind of explore that more through this course and how mindfulness really helps us to connect. Okay, so I will pass the talking stick over to the next person, and remember there's a right to pass. So if you don't feel like doing an introduction today, you can say, I'm going to pass. So I'll pass it over to Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph, he, him, also in Nashville, also originally from Los Angeles.
Everyone for bringing yourselves into this space and for sharing. So in each class, we'll have a little bit of time to share at the beginning as well, just to do informal check-ins. But it was really nice to learn a little bit about all of you. So I'd like to start with just kind of going back to the basics. Like, we're in a mindfulness class. What is mindfulness? So one definition that I really resonate with, that I really like, is being aware of the present moment with knowing and without judgment. I also like to throw in with care. So when I take a step forward, I know that I'm stepping with my right foot. I'm not necessarily planning it or thinking about it, but I just know in this moment, oh, my right foot is moving forward. I like to compare this to like my dog, Archie. So we could say, our animals are our pets mindful because they only live in the present moment, right? They don't worry about the past. They don't plan the future. They're just in the moment. So are they mindful? And so this is where that knowing component comes in. So Archie, yes, lives in the present, but he doesn't necessarily, I don't think, he doesn't necessarily know, oh, I'm putting my right paw forward right now, or I'm stuffing around because I'm looking for a place to poop, right? Like he doesn't have that sense of knowing. And because he doesn't have that sense of knowing, there's no potential for him to wake up. And so this comes back to kind of, Kate, what you were looking for in like, well, how does all this stuff tie to understanding what's going on? This practice, mindfulness, meditation, Buddhist practice in general, is about waking up. So a lot of people think it's about like chilling out and blissing out and escaping to a cave. And there's some traditions that are like that. And there's definitely an element of stress relief that comes with practice. I have experienced it a lot and I love it. But a lot of it is about waking up to what is the reality of the way that things are right now, both internally, inside myself, in my own mind, getting to know my mind, and externally, what's going on with the people around me, what's going on with the world. And it's harder than one might think because we have our own storylines constantly of what's going on. So we may see something in front of us and our minds may automatically jump to putting together these like 3, 5, 10 dots of what that means, what we think is going on. But maybe that's not going on at all, right? Maybe our biases are actually just clouding our vision of what's really going on. And we all have biases, right? We're born with them. So mindfulness, meditation, this practice helps us to start to see, oh, this is a storyline. This is what's perhaps really going on. And then when we can see what's really going on, then that can help us take wise action, right? Maybe not reactive action, not action that's based on an immediate like anger response or trauma response, but wise action. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So mindfulness does have roots in Buddhism. It came from a discourse called the Satipatthana Sutta. And the suttas in Buddhism are essentially discourses, like stuff that the Buddha said that people wrote down hundreds of years later. So it was originally taught as just like an oral tradition where the Buddha gave talks to all of his disciples, like thousands of disciples, and then they gave talks to their students. And that's how this tradition got transmitted. And that's why you might see like lots of different branches and traditions of Buddhism, because a lot of people like just heard and weren't writing stuff down, and stuff only got written down much later. And then you have the question of translation, right? It got written down in Sanskrit and Pali, and then it got translated into all these other languages, and words are important. So things start to change when they get translated into different languages. So mindfulness came from this thing called the Satipatthana Sutta, which is in the Theravadan tradition. And the Theravadan tradition is just one kind of like group of ways of understanding Buddhism that really focus on the Buddha's early teachings. And the Satipatthana Sutta really focuses on these 4 foundations of mindfulness, which we're going to talk about in each of our classes. We'll be talking about the first, second, third, and fourth foundation and how they relate to how we relate to the earth and climate change. The Theravadan tradition is what underlies what is called in modern times and in the Western world insight. So some of you may have heard names like Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salzberg, John Kabat-Zinn. These are all people who are, I call them like celebrity teachers because they're famous, they've written books, they've like made videos, like all these things. I also call them like convert communities, so Western convert communities. So there's a lot of other traditions that have continued the Asian lineage of Buddhism coming over from maybe Thailand or Vietnam or Taiwan or China, that are communities that are here continuing to practice Buddhism, that have brought over the practices in these Asian temples with these Asian monastics. So I definitely want to honor them too, because they also brought over Buddhism to the West. So I talked a little bit about the purpose of mindfulness. And when I think about it on like a really personal level and what it's done for me in my life, it's really given me this sense of freedom, right? This liberation from, I call them like hooks. Actually, Pema Chodron, who's a teacher in the Shambhala tradition, she calls them hooks. So these are things that, you know, they are occurrences in our lives or emotions that hook into us and kind of stay there. And they start to become us a little bit. You can also think of them as binds or attachments or automatic reactions. So this practice of mindfulness and understanding myself and knowing has helped me to see my patterns and these hooks that I have, like my things that I use to approach everyday life with. And so when I can see these hooks that I have, it helps me to understand my suffering that comes from those hooks. And when I can understand my suffering, then I can have some freedom from the suffering, and I can start to approach true happiness, which is free of these things. Like I can just open my heart and I don't have to worry about these hooks. Maybe they're still there, but perhaps because I name them and I know them, they don't have as much power over me. So the practice of meditation is pretty cool because it's a practice, kind of like if you want to get good at piano, like I grew up playing piano, you have to practice every day. Sometimes it's fun, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you feel like meditating and sometimes you don't. And so there's like a sense of discipline, which is like, okay, every morning after I brush my teeth, I'm going to sit my butt on the cushion and I'm going to set my timer and I'm not going to get up until the timer's done. Super, super helpful. That's the practice element of it. But meditation is also the fruition or the result where while we're sitting and meditating, we are having a direct experience of our minds and of the world. So that's while you're meditating, you might really get that sense of true peace. You might get that taste of freedom. You might get that sense of knowing. And sometimes it's pleasant, sometimes it's not, but it's fruition, right? It's result of practice. So that's what's kind of magical about meditation. It's a practice, it's the path, and it's also the fruition. I like to think of it kind of like what I was saying about like practicing piano. Some people also like to think of it as like weight training. So like if you lift weights every day, then you're going to get stronger. I heard a teacher say, like, I'm switching metaphors a lot here, but like it's like brushing your teeth. If you brush your teeth, if you decide to not brush your teeth during the week because you got too busy or whatever, and you're like, okay, I'll catch up on the weekend. I'll brush my teeth for 2 hours on Saturday. Doesn't really work that well. So the same thing as lifting weights. You're building this muscle. You're training your mind. That's really what we're doing. We're training our minds to come back to where we feel like is generative, which is healthy, which is nourishing. And so when we can train the mind to behave in a way which is helpful to us, then it can help us handle discomfort, right? Without jumping to an automatic reaction that's like completely out of our control. It's amazing. Like I noticed, like it's amazing how much of where my mind goes during the day is not within my control. It's like, who is controlling me? Like, what is going on? And so when we can apply this sense of training, this like the weightlifting or the working out or whatever you might think of it as, we're also training ourselves in handling discomfort and in being kind to ourselves as we encounter discomfort, because guess what? Discomfort is everywhere. We train ourselves in seeing reality without our storylines, like what I was saying earlier. And then from that space of not like jumping to conclusions and jumping to reactions and jumping to like numbing out, maybe if I have an uncomfortable situation, from that space, then I can take wise action. What is going to benefit the situation in this moment? That's the question I love to ask myself. What's going to benefit the situation? Not necessarily what's going to benefit me or what's going to benefit that person. What's going to benefit the situation? And I can take action that's wise and that's generative, right? There's so much burnout in any space of social action, social justice. And so maybe if I have a little bit of space, it's like the path and the fruition as well. The space itself gives me nourishment, but it also gives me the space to decide what action to take, an action that is going to be helpful for the situation and for myself. So let's talk about how the Buddhist teachings relate to climate change. Obviously, climate change did not exist at the time of the Buddha over 2,600 years ago. Wasn't a problem. So there's no like specific teachings or suttas on climate change. But a lot of the principles apply to how we relate to the earth. And we'll go through a lot of them more and we'll experience them more throughout these 4 weeks. But the one that sticks out to me the most is a sense of interconnectedness. And this is not unique to Buddhism, right? Indigenous cultures all over the world based their wisdom, their practices on this understanding of interconnectedness. And we're even seeing it now in modern times with COVID. Like we do not exist in a vacuum. So the Buddha did teach that nothing exists in a vacuum. All phenomena being anything you can experience through your senses, all phenomena arise because of other phenomena. Or you could think of it, they arise, everything that happens because of causes and conditions. There's never just like one cause or one person to blame, if you want to think of it that way. We all play a part in it. So you can think of this, the Buddha taught it as this concept of emptiness, which is that all things are empty of like having a fixed identity. They arise because of the causes and conditions that surround them. And you can think of it as it applies to like a person. Like, I am Jennifer Wong. I maybe identify as these 5 different labels, my race, my ethnicity, my gender, my economic background, my educational background, whatever it might be. All of those things came about because of causes and conditions, not because I am this like identity that is fixed, that will always be these things. Inherently, I don't have any of those things. All of those things could change. The Pali word for this is anatta. It's also called no self, which is kind of hard to grasp. So that's why I don't like to like initially jump out the gate with talking about no self. Because it's like, wait, what do you mean? Like I'm right here. But I'm right here in this relative sense of like how I know myself in my everyday life. But I know that my true nature is bigger than that, right? My true nature is the same as the trees and the sky, which is we don't inherently have an identity. We're just here. Human beings, not doings. This concept of causes and conditions also means that everything that arises has a consequence. I don't exist in a vacuum. Everything that I do has an impact somewhere, right? It's like an extreme of the butterfly effect, where everything that I say, everything I do, even if I don't see it immediately, even if I can't like understand it immediately, has an effect, whether it's on me or on somebody else or on the environment around me. All actions have consequences, and that is karma. A lot of people think of karma as like, oh, you had it coming to you, like, I don't know, use it in like a negative sense, but it's not necessarily that you did this, therefore you have it coming to you. Like something could happen in my life, or I could say something or do something, and it might affect me, sure, but it's also going to affect other people and other things. So every action has a consequence. That's all karma is. And so these fundamental teachings, like we're really talking about Buddhism here, the teachings of Buddhism, they extend to all beings and all objects, not just humans. So Thich Nhat Hanh, who I mentioned earlier, the Vietnamese Zen master, he uses this really beautiful example of a cup of tea. So he says, when we drink a cup of tea, it's not just a cup of tea. The ocean and the clouds and rain produced the water that goes into the tea. The tea leaves grew on a tree or on a bush, and therefore a farmer had to cultivate the tree or the bush. There's soil involved, there's sun involved. So when we drink a cup of tea, we're also drinking the ocean, the rain, the clouds that the rain fell from, as well as the farmer and the soil and the sun. All of these are part of this cup of tea. It's not just a cup of tea. And so when we think of us as human beings, we're part of this earth, right? We're not separate from it. The tea went into my body. The soil, the farmer, the sun went into my body. The clouds, the rain went to my body. That earth is part of my body. I'm not separate from it. I don't dominate it. I'm just part of it. This body came from the earth. It's kind of on loan from it for however many years. It's going to go back to the earth. So when we take care of the earth, we're really taking care of ourselves. And when we injure the earth, we're injuring ourselves. Thich Nhat Hanh, again, says, imagine each being as your mother, which is like an extreme way of thinking about it. But I mean, it's kind of true. Like all of these particles that we breathe exist. Like my mom is breathing the same air. I think there's a statistic which is every like molecule of breath circulates the entire globe within a year, which is amazing. The molecule of breath that I'm breathing is going to be breathed by someone like anywhere in the world within 365 days. We all share that. So coming back to like the actual practice and on a very personal level, mindfulness really allows us to get to know ourselves better, right? Like all these things that I'm talking about, the emptiness, the karma, it all comes back to, okay, well, how do I perceive it? But all of these things I perceive through my body. My brain is a part of my body. So all these practices allow me to get to know myself better. And I can start to see, as I was saying, my patterns, my biases, my greed, my aversions, like get that away from me, my delusions, like, no, that's not true. No, that can't be true. And I can maybe see, for example, my resistance sometimes that comes up to worrying about climate change, right? Like, no, I don't want that to be true. That's delusion. It's true, but like, just, I don't want to talk about it right now. And I see this in a lot of people. I see this in my family. Climate change is something that's like far away and other people will deal with. Or I see aversion come up when I see someone at the grocery store using paper bags instead of reusable bags. Okay, immediately judgment comes up, aversion, like, why are they doing that? No, it's so easy, right? I'm getting to know my mind. And sometimes it's not pleasant. Like there's a lot of judgment there, I've been noticing. So we can train in compassion. We can train in noticing these patterns. And we can train in sensing the sense of non-separation, right? And we'll do this as the weeks come. This practice can really help us to feel the sense of not separation, destroying the delusion of separation is another way of saying it. So I'll take a beat there. And I'd like to lead us in a guided meditation, and then we'll have some time for discussion and Q&A. So this practice that we're going to do today is kind of what's known as like a basic mindfulness practice. Christy, if you've been using Calm, you've probably done this a few times. It's basically a practice of coming back to the breath. It's also known as a concentration practice because we're gathering our mind into one object of meditation. And we're saying, all right, for this time period, I'm going to keep coming back to this object over and over again. So it's really important that this is a gentle practice. It's not about getting rid of thoughts. It's about when a thought comes up, what do we do with it? Because thoughts are going to come up. That's what our brains do. Our brains think. It's just a natural part of life, and that's fine. It's totally fine in this practice. The question is, what do you do with that thought? Okay, so feel free to be on camera or off camera for this. Your eyes can be closed or not. If you choose to keep them open, I'd invite you to just have like a soft gaze where you're kind of looking downwards, but not really looking at anything. I'm going to go off camera as well. And so we'll start with posture. If you like to find yourself in a posture that is conducive to being alert and awake and also relaxed. So maybe you're sitting up tall in your chair. If you have like a cushion behind you, you can allow that cushion to kind of prop you up so that your back is nice and straight. And feeling your feet planted on the ground, the full length of both 2 feet touching the earth. And just feel those feet, that contact with the earth. And feel the contact of the earth that your seat is making through the chair, through the couch, whatever it might be, through the cushion. Feeling the earth through these 2 contact points, the seat and the feet. And taking a moment just to take 3 deep cleansing breaths, getting your mind familiar with the sensation of breathing. And as you continue your breathing, bringing your mind to how the breath feels in the body. And we're not analyzing here, we're not focusing really tightly. It's kind of like a gentle attention. The amount of effort you can be putting into it can be kind of like the amount of effort your ears are putting into listening to my voice. So, feeling how the breath feels in the body, maybe noticing where the breath feels like it's flowing easily, where it feels easeful in your body. And now bringing your attention to maybe where it feels less easeful. Maybe it's getting stuck somewhere. And we're not here to change it, we're just here to notice it and maybe bring a little bit of care to it. This practice is about knowing with care, without judgment. It's a knowing that we're placing the attention on the feeling of the body breathing. And when the mind wanders, it's not a problem at all. It's perfectly natural. And the moment of noticing that your mind has wandered is a moment of waking up. Oh, my mind has wandered. And usually, when that happens, you naturally come back to the breath. That is kind of the guide rails of this practice, the aspiration of this practice, to come back. This breath is what tethers us to the present moment. The breath can't live in the past or live in the future. It's only here, only now. And so by coming back to the feeling of the breath in the body, we're really coming back to the present moment. Just being in the present moment. Where do you feel the breath in the body? Where do you feel it the deepest? Where does it nourish you? Gathering your attention on the feeling of the body breathing. Not here to change the breath in any way. Not here to change anything. I'm just here to shine a kind and gentle light on it. And when the mind wanders again, it's another rep of waking up. This is our practice. With gentleness, we can come back. Thank you for your practice. So I did a lot of talking today, and we didn't do a ton of practice, and we don't have a ton of time for chatting. There will be more practice and chatting in our future sessions. But we do have some time now to open it up if you'd like to share anything that's coming up for you that came up during your practice, or any questions. And Kate, maybe we can stop the recording.